Ryan had been awake since 5 in the morning, but he wasn't tired at all. Today was the day he'd been dreaming about for 3 years. Today he was marrying Sophie, the woman who had changed his entire world. As he stood in front of the mirror, in the small room behind the chapel, adjusting his black tie for what felt like the 100th time, he couldn't stop smiling. The morning sun was streaming through the windows of the old church, casting golden light across the wooden floors. Outside, he could hear the gentle chatter of guests arriving, car doors closing, and the sound of his future mother-in-law directing the photographers. Everything was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Ryan had met Sophie 4 years ago at a coffee shop near the university where they both worked. She was a librarian with the most beautiful laugh he'd ever heard, and he was the new IT guy who couldn't figure out how to work the fancy coffee machine. She'd helped him that first day, teasing him gently about being hopeless with anything. That wasn't a computer. From that moment, he knew she was special. Their relationship had been like something out of a movie. Weekend trips to the mountains, late-night conversations about everything and nothing, quiet Sunday mornings reading together in bed. Sophie had this way of making even the most ordinary moments feel magical. When Ryan proposed last Christmas, with snow falling outside their apartment window, she'd cried happy tears and said yes before he could even finish asking the question. Now, as he looked at himself in the mirror, Ryan felt overwhelmed with gratitude. In just 2 hours, Sophie would walk down that aisle in her grandmother's vintage dress, and they would promise to love each other forever. They'd already found the perfect little house with a garden where Sophie could grow her flowers. They'd talked about kids, about traveling to Ireland where her family came from, about growing old together. His best friend Tom knocked on the door and stuck his head in. Tom had been Ryan's roommate in college and was the one who'd convinced him to. Finally asked Sophie out after weeks of Ryan talking about the pretty librarian who made him nervous. "Hey man, you ready for this?" Tom grinned, straightening his blue tie. "Because there's no backing out now. I've seen your bride, and she looks absolutely stunning." Ryan turned around, his face lighting up. "I've been ready for this since the day I met her. Is she nervous? How does she look?" "Wait, don't tell me. I want to be surprised." Tom laughed. "Trust me, you're going to lose your mind when you see her." "But hey, Sophie left her phone in the car. We used to bring some stuff from the hotel this morning. She asked me to grab it for her. You know how she gets when she doesn't have her phone." Ryan chuckled. Sophie was definitely attached to her phone, always taking pictures of flowers, texting her sister in California, or reading articles about new books for the library. Yeah, she'd panic if she doesn't have it. She probably wants to. Take 1,000,000 pictures before the ceremony. Tom handed him the phone. "Can you take it to her? I need to go check on the flowers. Apparently there was some issue with the delivery and your mom is having a moment." "Sure thing." Ryan took the sleek pink phone, Sophie's favorite color. He'd bought her this exact phone last year for her birthday because she'd mentioned wanting to upgrade. Even holding it made him think of her, of all the sweet text messages they'd exchanged over the years, all the photos of them together stored inside. As he walked toward the door, planning to head to the bridal room across the hall, the phone suddenly lit up with a notification, then another, and another. Ryan glanced down automatically, not really meaning to read anything, but the name on the screen made him stop in his tracks. The messages were from someone named David, with a red heart emoji next to the name. That was strange. Sophie had never mentioned anyone named David. Ryan's stomach did a little flip, but he told himself it was probably just a colleague or maybe someone from her book club. But then another message popped up, and this one made Ryan's blood run cold. "Can't wait to hold you again after this whole wedding thing is over." Ryan stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he was reading. There had to be some mistake. Maybe it was meant for someone else. Maybe Sophie's number got mixed up somehow. But then another message appeared. "I know today is hard for you, but remember what we talked about. This doesn't change anything between us." Ryan's hands started shaking. He looked around the empty room as if someone might appear to explain what was happening. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of horrible misunderstanding. Sophie loved him. They were getting married in less than 2 hours. She'd been planning this day for months, excited about every detail from the flowers to the music, but the messages kept coming, and each one felt like a punch to his chest. Ryan seems like a nice guy, but you know where your heart really belongs? The phone felt heavy in Ryan's hands like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He wanted to throw it across the room to pretend he'd never seen these messages, but he couldn't look away. More texts were appearing, and as he scrolled up to see the conversation history, his worst fears were confirmed. The messages went back months. Months of, "I love you," and "I miss you," and "can't wait to see you tonight." There were references to places Sophie had told Ryan she was going with friends, times when she'd said she was working late at the library. One message from just 3 days ago made Ryan feel physically sick. "I love you too, David. After the wedding, we can finally be together the way we want to be." Ryan will never have to know. Ryan sank into the chair by the window, still staring at the phone. Outside, he could see guests arriving in their best clothes, smiling and laughing. His parents were greeting Sophie's parents by the church entrance. Everyone looked so happy, so excited for the celebration about to begin. How long had this been going on? How had he missed it? Ryan thought back over the past few months, looking for signs he might have overlooked. Had Sophie been distant? She seemed different, but honestly, she'd seemed normal. Happy even. Excited about the wedding, talking about their honeymoon, making plans for their future together. The door opened and Tom stuck his head back in. "Hey, did you take Sophie her phone?" "Because she's starting to ask about it, and you know how she gets." Ryan looked up at his best friend, and Tom's expression immediately changed from casual to concerned. "Dude, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ryan held up the phone, his voice barely a whisper. "She's cheating on me, Tom. Sophie is cheating on me." The words felt impossible to say out loud, like speaking a foreign language. This morning, his biggest worry had been whether his tie was straight. Now, his entire world was falling apart, one text message at a time. And in less than 2 hours, he was supposed to walk down that aisle and promise to love and honor the woman who had been lying to him for months. Tom closed the door behind him and rushed over. "What are you talking about? That's impossible." "Sophie loves you. Everyone can see that." But as Ryan showed him the messages, Tom's face went pale too. They sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of the discovery settling over them like a dark cloud. Outside, the church bells chimed, marking another step closer to a ceremony that now felt like the cruelest joke in the world. Tom stared at the phone screen, reading the messages over and over again. His face had gone completely white, and Ryan could see his hands were shaking too. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the distant chatter of wedding guests outside. "This can't be real," Tom finally whispered. "I mean Sophie, our Sophie? The woman who cries during dog movies and bakes you cookies when you're stressed? There has to be some explanation." Ryan wanted to believe that more than anything in the world. He wanted Tom to tell him this was all some terrible misunderstanding, that there was a perfectly innocent reason why another man was texting his bride about loving her and being together after the wedding. But the evidence was right therein. Black and white, message after message, going back months. "Look at this one," Ryan said, his voice cracking as he pointed to a text from 2 weeks ago. "She told me she was at her sister's baby shower that Saturday. But look what she wrote to him. Amazing night with you. Can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore." Ryan remembered that Saturday clearly. Sophie had come home late, smelling like expensive perfume he'd never bought her. She'd been glowing, happy, and had talked about how much fun the baby shower was. She'd even shown him pictures on her phone of the decorations and gifts. Had she planned those lies? Had she been thinking about this David person while she was lying next to Ryan that night? Tom sat down heavily in the chair next to Ryan. "Okay, let's think about this logically. What are your options here?" "Options?" Ryan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tom, my bride is cheating on me, and I found out 30 minutes before our wedding ceremony. What options do I have?" But even as he said it, Ryan's mind was racing. He could feel panic rising in his chest, making it hard to breathe. Outside, he could hear his Aunt Martha directing people to their seats. His grandmother had flown in from Florida for this day. Sophie's parents had spent their savings on the reception dinner. There were 150 people out there, all dressed up, all excited to celebrate what they thought was a beautiful love story. "You could confront her right now," Tom said quietly. "Go to the bridal room and ask her to explain." Ryan tried to imagine that conversation. Walking into the room where Sophie was probably putting on her lipstick, surrounded by her bridesmaids, everyone laughing and taking pictures. What would he say? "Hey, honey, I saw your phone and found out you've been having an affair for months?" The thought made him feel sick. What if she denies it? Ryan asked. What if she says the messages don't mean what I think they mean? Do you think that's possible? Ryan looked at the phone again. He wanted to believe it was possible, but the messages were pretty clear. This wasn't some casual friendship or innocent flirtation. This was a full relationship, complete with plans for the future and promises of love. And the worst part was the message about Ryan never having to know. Sophie wasn't planning to end this affair after the wedding. She was planning to continue it. A knock on the door made both men jump. Ryan quickly turned Sophie's phone face down on the table. "Ryan? You in there, son?" It was his father's voice. "Yeah, Dad, I'm here." His father opened the door and stepped in, looking handsome in his best suit. Ryan had never seen his dad look so proud and happy. "Just wanted to check on you before the big moment. Your mother is crying already, and the ceremony hasn't even started." Ryan forced a smile, but it felt like his face was made of plastic. "I'm good, Dad, just getting ready." His father studied his face for a moment. "You sure? You look a little pale. Wedding nerves?" "Something like that," Ryan managed. "Well, that's normal. I was nervous as a cat before I married your mother. But once I saw her walking down that aisle, all the nerves disappeared. You're going to feel the same way when you see Sophie. She's going to take your breath away." After his father left, Ryan put his head in his hands. His dad was so excited, so proud of his son for finding such a wonderful woman. His parents had fallen in love with Sophie from the moment they met her. His mother was always saying how lucky Ryan was, how Sophie was perfect for him. "You could call the whole thing off," Tom said softly. "Tell everyone there's been an emergency or that you're sick." Ryan thought about that option too. He could have Tom make an announcement, say there was a family crisis or that Ryan had food poisoning. It would be embarrassing and people would be disappointed, but at least he wouldn't have to stand up there and make promises to someone who was lying to him. But then what? All these people had traveled here, some from across the country. His cousin had taken time off work. Sophie's elderly grandfather had made the trip despite his health problems. The church was paid for, the reception was ready, the photographer was already taking pictures. It would be chaos. And what about Sophie? She was probably in the bridal room right now, happy and excited, putting the finishing touches on her makeup. She had no idea that Ryan knew about David. Part of him almost felt sorry for her. How would she feel when Tom walked in and told her? The wedding was canceled. Would she be relieved? Would she cry? Would she finally tell the truth? "There's a third option," Ryan said suddenly, an idea forming in his mind. It was crazy, but maybe it was the only way to handle this situation with any dignity. "What's that?" "I could go through with the ceremony." Tom stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Are you serious, Ryan? She's cheating on you. You can't marry someone who's betraying you." "No, listen to me," Ryan said, standing up and starting to pace. "What if I go through with the ceremony, but I use it to tell the truth? What if I use my wedding vows to let everyone know what's really happening?" The idea was growing stronger in his mind. Instead of running away or hiding, instead of letting Sophie continue to lie to everyone, he could expose the truth in front of all their family and friends. It would be shocking, yes, but it would also be honest. After months of being lied to, Ryan was desperate for some honesty. "Dude, that's insane," Tom said. "You can't humiliate her like that in front of everyone." "She humiliated me first," Ryan shot back. She's been making a fool of me for months while I planned our future together. While I was picking out flowers and tasting wedding cakes, she was with another man. While I was telling everyone how lucky I was to marry her, she was planning to keep cheating on me." Tom was quiet for a moment. "But think about her family, Ryan, her parents, her grandmother. They don't deserve to be embarrassed like that." That stopped Ryan short. Sophie's parents were good people who had welcomed him into their family with open arms. Her grandmother had given Sophie her wedding dress, the same dress Sophie's mother had worn 30 years ago. They were probably so proud right now, so happy to see their daughter getting married, but then Ryan thought about his own family, about how they'd feel when they eventually learned the truth. Wouldn't it be better to be honest now, in front of everyone, rather than let this lie continue? How long would Sophie expect him to pretend everything was fine? How long was he supposed to smile and act like a happy husband while his wife was in love with someone else? The clock on the wall chimed, and Ryan realized with a jolt that it was 15 minutes until the ceremony was supposed to start. 15 minutes to make a decision that would change everything. 15 minutes to figure out how to handle the biggest betrayal of his life. Outside, he could hear the musicians starting to tune their instruments. Someone was testing the microphone at the altar. His future was rushing toward him like a freight train, and he had to decide right now whether to jump on or get out of the way. Ryan picked up Sophie's phone one more time, scrolling through the messages. Each one felt like a knife in his heart, but they also made him angry. How dare she do this to him? How dare she make him look like a fool in front of everyone they knew? "I'm going to do it," he said finally, his voice stronger than it had been all morning. "I'm going to go through with the ceremony, and I'm going to tell everyone the truth." Tom looked terrified. "Ryan, please think about this. Once you do this, there's no taking it back." "Good," Ryan said, straightening his tie and checking his appearance in the mirror one last time. "I'm tired of living a lie. If Sophie wants to destroy our relationship, then she can face the consequences in front of everyone who came here to celebrate our love." As he walked toward the door, Ryan felt strangely calm for the first time since he'd seen those text messages. He had a plan now, and somehow that made everything feel more manageable. In a few minutes he would walk down that aisle and face the woman who had broken his heart. But this time he would be the one with the power. This time he would be the one telling the truth. The walk from the back room to the altar felt like the longest journey of Ryan's life. His legs felt heavy, like he was walking through thick mud, but somehow he kept putting one foot in front of the other. The church was packed with people he'd known his whole life. His elementary school teacher was in the third row. His college roommates were grinning at him from the left side. Everyone looked so happy, so excited to witness what they thought would be the most beautiful moment of his life. Tom walked beside him, still looking worried. Every few steps he would glance at Ryan as if he expected him to change his mind and run, but Ryan's decision was made. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, but his mind was crystal clear. After months of being lied to, he was finally going to tell the truth. The church looked absolutely perfect. Sophie had spent weeks choosing every detail, from the white roses wrapped around the pillars to the soft lighting that made everything glow. The musicians were playing the processional music they'd selected together, the same song they'd danced to on their first date. It should have been magical. Instead, it felt like he was walking into a nightmare. As Ryan took his place at the altar, he could see faces in the crowd turning to smile at him. His mother was crying happy tears already, just like his father had predicted. Sophie's parents were beaming with pride. Her elderly grandfather, who had flown in despite his arthritis, was sitting in the front row with tears in his eyes. These people loved Sophie. They loved both of them. They had no idea what was about to happen. Pastor Williams, who had known Ryan since he was a kid, leaned over and whispered, "You ready for this, son? You look a little nervous." Ryan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He was nervous, but not in the way Pastor Williams thought. He wasn't nervous about getting married. He was nervous about what he was going to say when it came time for the vows. The music changed, and everyone in the church stood up. Ryan's breath caught in his throat as the doors at the back of the church opened. First came the bridesmaids. Sophie's college friends and her sister, all wearing soft blue dresses and carrying small bouquets. They were all smiling, probably thinking about how this was such a beautiful day for their friend. Then the music swelled. And Sophie appeared, knowing what he knew, even with his heart broken into 1,000 pieces. Ryan had to admit that Sophie looked absolutely stunning. She was wearing her grandmother's vintage lace dress, which fit her perfectly. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant updo with small flowers tucked behind her ears. She was glowing with happiness, and when she saw Ryan at the altar, her face lit up with the biggest smile he'd ever seen. For just a moment, Ryan felt his resolve waver. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. This was the person who made him laugh every day, who knew exactly how he liked his coffee, who had held his hand through his father's heart surgery last year. Looking at her now, it was almost impossible to believe that she had been betraying him for months, but then he thought about the text messages. He thought about David, whoever he was, waiting for Sophie to come back to him after this whole wedding thing was over. He thought about all the lies, all the nights Sophie had said she was working late or visiting friends when she was really with another man. The anger came flooding back, stronger than before. Sophie's father walked her down the aisle slowly, stopping every few steps to nod at friends and family. Sophie kept her eyes on Ryan the whole time, her smile never fading. She looked like the happiest bride in the world. She had no idea that her secret was out, no idea that the man waiting for her at the altar knew everything. When they reached the front, Sophie's father lifted her veil and kissed her cheek. "Take care of my little girl," he whispered to Ryan, just like they'd rehearsed the night before. Then he placed Sophie's hand in Ryan's and stepped back to sit with his wife. Sophie squeezed Ryan's hand and whispered, "You look so handsome. I love you so much." Ryan looked into her eyes, those brown eyes he'd stared into 1,000 times, and saw nothing but love and excitement. Either Sophie was the best actress in the world, or she genuinely believed she could have both Ryan and David. Maybe she thought she could keep living this double life forever, that Ryan would never find out. Pastor Williams smiled at both of them and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Ryan and Sophie in holy matrimony. This is a day of joy, a day of celebration, a day when two people who love each other deeply make a commitment to spend their lives together." Ryan barely heard the opening words. His mind was focused on what he was going to say when it came time for the vows. He'd run through it in his head dozens of times during the walk down the aisle. He knew exactly what he wanted to say, how he wanted to reveal the truth. It would be devastating, but it would also be honest. The ceremony continued with readings from Sophie's sister and one of Ryan's groomsmen. People shared stories about love and commitment and partnership. The whole time, Sophie stood next to Ryan, holding his hand, occasionally squeezing it and smiling at him. She was playing the part of the perfect bride, probably thinking about how beautiful the photos would be, how everyone would remember this as the most romantic wedding they'd ever attended. Finally, Pastor Williams reached the part Ryan had been both dreading and anticipating. "Now, Ryan and Sophie have chosen to write their own vows. Ryan, would you like to go first?" This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. Ryan could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked out at the crowd one more time, seeing all the expectant faces. These people were expecting to hear beautiful words about love and forever. They were expecting promises and poetry. And happy tears. Instead, Ryan was about to blow up everything they thought they knew about the couple standing at the altar. He turned to face Sophie, who was looking at him with such trust and love that it almost broke his heart all over again. She had no idea what was coming. In her mind, this was still the perfect wedding day she'd been planning for months. "Sophie," Ryan began, his voice carrying clearly through the church's sound system. "When I woke up this morning, I thought this would be the happiest day of my life. I thought I was about to marry the woman of my dreams, the person I wanted to spend forever with." Sophie's smile grew even bigger. She probably thought this was going to be one of those vows that would make everyone cry happy tears. But sometimes Ryan continued, "Life has a way of showing us the truth when we least expect it. Sometimes we discover that the person we thought we knew isn't the person they really are." Sophie's smile faltered slightly. She tilted her head, looking confused. As if she wasn't sure where this was going, Ryan took a deep breath. This was it. The point of no return. "This morning I found out that the woman I'm supposed to marry, the woman I've loved and trusted for 4 years, has been living a lie. I found out that while I've been planning our future together, she's been planning a future with someone else." A murmur went through the crowd. People were starting to look confused, whispering to each other. Sophie's face went completely white. "I found out that the woman standing next to me has been having an affair for months with someone named David. I found out that she's been lying to me, to all of us, about who she really is and what she really wants." The church erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. Sophie's mother stood up from her seat, looking horrified. Sophie herself was staring at Ryan in complete shock, her mouth open but no words coming out. But Ryan wasn't finished. Now that he'd started, he couldn't stop. All the pain and anger and betrayal that had been building up inside him came pouring out in front of everyone who had come to celebrate their love. "So, Sophie, here are my real vows to you. I promise to never again trust someone who lies to my face. I promise to never again ignore the signs when someone is betraying me. And I promise that I will never, ever marry someone who doesn't love me enough to be faithful." The silence in the church was deafening. No one was moving. No one was even breathing. Sophie was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she still hadn't said a word. Ryan could see her bridesmaids looking at each other in shock, could see both sets of parents trying to figure out what was happening. Pastor Williams looked like he had no idea what to do. This was clearly not covered in his wedding ceremony handbook, doc. And then, just when Ryan thought the worst was over, something happened that no one could have predicted. From somewhere in the crowd, a man's voice called out, "Sophie, is this true?" Ryan turned toward the voice and saw a tall man with dark hair standing up in one of the back rows. The man was well-dressed, handsome, and looking directly at Sophie with an expression of pain and confusion. It was David. The other man was actually here, at their wedding, watching this whole thing unfold. Every head in the church turned toward the back where the voice had come from. Ryan felt like his entire world was spinning out of control. The man who had called out was tall and handsome, probably around 30, with dark hair and wearing an expensive navy suit. He was standing in the very last row, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. Sophie let out a gasp when she saw him. "David, what are you doing here?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the church, everyone could hear her clearly. So this was David. This was the man Sophie had been texting, the man she loved enough to betray her own wedding day. Ryan stared at him, trying to understand how this could be happening. How was the other man actually here at their wedding? Had Sophie invited him? Was this some sick game? David started walking down the aisle, and people moved aside to let him pass. His face was a mixture of confusion, anger, and something that looked almost like relief. "Sophie, I need to know if what he's saying is true. Did you really tell Ryan about us?" "Stop," Sophie said, holding up her hand. She was crying harder now, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks. "David, please don't do this here." "Not in front of everyone." But David kept walking until he was standing just a few feet from the altar. Ryan could see him clearly now, could see the pain in his eyes. Strangely, David didn't look like the villain Ryan had imagined. He looked hurt and confused, like he was just as much a victim in this situation as anyone else. "I trusted you," David said to Sophie, his voice cracking with emotion. "You told me that Ryan was controlling you, that your families were forcing you into this marriage. You said you didn't love him, that you were only going through with this because you had no choice." The crowd gasped again, even louder this time. Ryan felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Sophie had told David that Ryan was controlling? That their families were forcing the marriage? None of that was true. Their engagement had been completely Sophie's choice. Ryan had never forced her to do anything in their entire relationship. Not true, Ryan said, his voice carrying across the church. Sophie, how could you say that about me? About us? You're the one who brought up marriage first. You're the one who wanted a big wedding. Sophie was sobbing now, her hands covering her face. Her beautiful dress was wrinkled from her shaking, and the flowers in her hair were starting to fall out. She looked nothing like the radiant bride she'd been just minutes before. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." David looked between Sophie and Ryan, his confusion growing. "Wait, what do you mean? You're sorry?" "Sophie, you told me Ryan was emotionally abusive. You said he isolated you from your friends and controlled your money. You said your parents threatened to disown you if you didn't marry him." Ryan couldn't believe what he was hearing. He looked out at Sophie's parents in the front row, who looked absolutely horrified. Her father was a gentle man who worked as a high school math teacher. Her mother volunteered at the animal shelter and made cookies for every neighbor on their street. The idea that they would threaten to disown their daughter was ridiculous. "That's not true either," Ryan said, his voice getting stronger. "Sophie, why would you lie like that? Your parents love you. They've never threatened you with anything. And I've never tried to control you. You know, that's not who I am." The church was completely silent except for the sound of Sophie's crying. Everyone was staring at the three people at the altar, trying to piece together what was really happening. This wasn't just a simple case of cheating anymore. This was something much more complicated and disturbing. David turned to look at Ryan directly for the first time. "Are you saying she lied to me about you?" "I'm saying she lied to everyone about everything," Ryan replied. "Including you." That seemed to hit David like a physical blow. He stumbled backwards slightly, his face going even paler. "Sophie, is that true? Did you lie to me about Ryan? About your family? About why you were marrying him?" Sophie finally looked up from her hands. Her face was red and blotchy from crying, and she looked absolutely destroyed. For a moment, Ryan almost felt sorry for her, almost. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice so quiet that people in the back rows had to lean forward to hear her. "I loved both of you. I couldn't choose. I thought if I told David that you were bad for me, it would make it easier for him to understand why I was marrying you. I thought I could have both of you and nobody would get hurt." The honesty of that statement hit everyone like a bomb. Sophie hadn't been trapped or forced into anything. She hadn't been a victim of abuse or family pressure. She had simply wanted to have two men in her life, and she'd been willing to lie to both of them to make that happen. Ryan felt sick to his stomach. All those months when he'd been planning their future, Sophie had been planning to continue her affair after their wedding. She'd been planning to keep lying to him, keep meeting David in secret, keep living a double life. And David had thought he was rescuing her from an abusive relationship. So none of it was true? David asked, his voice hollow. "The things you told me about Ryan, about your family pressuring you, about feeling trapped, you made all of that up?" Sophie nodded miserably. "I'm sorry, David. I never meant to hurt you. I love you both, and I didn't want to lose either of you." David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You love me? Sophie, you've been lying to me for months. You made me believe I was helping you escape from a terrible situation. You made me believe Ryan was hurting you. How can you call that love?" Ryan was starting to understand the full scope of what Sophie had done. She hadn't just betrayed him. She'd manipulated David too, making him believe he was the good guy in this story, the one saving her from a bad relationship. David probably thought he was being noble, helping Sophie get away from an abusive husband-to-be. "David," Ryan said suddenly, surprising everyone including himself, "I think we've both been played." David looked at him with suspicion at first, but then his expression softened slightly. "You're not abusive, are you? You never controlled her or threatened her?" "Never," Ryan said firmly. "I loved her. I thought she loved me too. I had no idea about you until this morning when I saw her phone. And your family never threatened to disown her?" Ryan looked over at Sophie's parents, who were still sitting in shock in the front row. "Look at them. Do they look like people? Who would threaten their daughter? They've been nothing but supportive of whatever Sophie wanted to do." David followed Ryan's gaze and seemed to really see Sophie's family for the first time. Her mother was crying, but not angry tears. She looked heartbroken and confused. Her father had his arm around his wife, looking like he couldn't believe what his daughter had done. "Oh my God," David whispered. "Sophie, what have you done? Why would you lie about all of this?" Sophie was crying so hard she could barely speak. "I panicked," she managed to get out between sobs. "When I started having feelings for you, David, I didn't know what to do. I loved Ryan, but I loved you too. I thought if I made up stories about why I couldn't leave Ryan, you'd understand why I couldn't break up with him. I thought I could figure out a way to make it work. By lying to everyone?" Ryan asked. "By making David think I was some kind of monster? By planning to cheat on me for our entire marriage?" Sophie looked up at both men, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Ryan saw something like real understanding in her eyes. She was finally grasping the full impact of what she'd done. She hadn't just hurt Ryan with her affair. She'd manipulated David, making him complicit in something he never would have been part of if he'd known the truth. "I see it now," she whispered. "I see what I've done to both of you, to everyone. I've been so selfish, so scared of making a choice that I hurt everyone I claimed to love." The church was still completely silent. Ryan looked out at all the faces staring back at him. His grandmother was crying. Sophie's grandfather looked confused and frail. The bridesmaids were huddled together, probably wondering if they should do something. The groomsmen were standing awkwardly, not sure whether to stay or leave. This wasn't how any of them had imagined this day would go. What had started as a celebration of love had turned into the most painful and public breakup any of them had ever witnessed. But strangely, Ryan was starting to feel something he hadn't expected: relief, for months. He'd been living a lie without knowing it. Now finally the truth was out. It was horrible and painful and embarrassing, but it was real. And somehow that felt better than continuing to live in Sophie's web of deception. David seemed to be having similar thoughts. "I can't do this anymore, Sophie," he said quietly. "I thought I was in love with you, but I was in love with someone who doesn't exist. The person you pretended to be when you were with me wasn't real." Ryan nodded. "And the person you pretended to be with me wasn't real either. The faithful, honest woman I thought I was marrying is just a fantasy." Sophie looked back and forth between them, seeming to realize that she was losing both men she claimed to love. But instead of fighting for either relationship, she just nodded slowly. "You're both right," she said. "I don't even know who I really am anymore." The silence in the church stretched on for what felt like forever. Ryan looked around at all the shocked faces staring back at him. His aunt was covering her mouth in horror. Sophie's college friends were whispering frantically to each other. Some of the older guests looked like they didn't quite understand what had just happened, while others seemed frozen in their seats. Pastor Williams finally cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a moment to—" he started, but he seemed at a loss for words. Nothing in his years of performing wedding ceremonies had prepared him for this situation. Ryan felt strangely calm now that everything was out in the open. The worst had happened, and somehow he was still standing, still breathing, still functioning. All those months of being lied to were over. The truth hurt, but at least it was real. He looked at Sophie, who was still crying quietly, her beautiful dress now wrinkled and stained with tears. Despite everything she had done to him, despite all the lies and betrayal, Ryan felt something unexpected stirring in his chest. It wasn't love anymore, but it wasn't pure anger either. It was something closer to pity. "Sophie," he said quietly, and she looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. "I need you to know that I forgive you." The words surprised everyone, including Ryan himself. He hadn't planned to say that. But as soon as the words left his mouth, he realized they were true. Sophie stared at him in shock. "What?" "I forgive you," Ryan repeated, his voice getting stronger. "Not because what you did was okay, not because it didn't hurt me, but because holding on to this anger isn't going to help anyone." David was staring at Ryan like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "How can you forgive her?" "She destroyed your wedding day. She's been lying to you for months." Ryan turned to David, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt a connection with the other man. They had both been victims of Sophie's lies, just in different ways. "She's been lying to you too," Ryan said. "She made you believe you were saving her from an abusive relationship. She made you think you were doing the right thing." "We were both played, David." David's shoulders sagged as the full weight of that truth hit him. "I really thought I was helping her. I thought Ryan ... I mean, I thought you were hurting her. Sophie, how could you make me believe that? How could you make me part of hurting an innocent person?" Sophie was crying even harder now. "I'm sorry," she kept saying over and over. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I just ... I was scared. I didn't know how to choose between." So you chose to lie to everyone instead?" David said, shaking his head. "Sophie, I can't be with someone who would do this. I thought I knew you, but I don't know you at all." Ryan watched as David turned away from Sophie and started walking back up the aisle. He moved slowly, like an old man, his shoulders bent with the weight of everything he'd learned. As he reached the door of the church, he paused and turned back. "Ryan," he called out, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was part of this, even though I didn't know what was really happening. You seem like a good guy, and you didn't deserve any of this." Then David was gone, and Ryan knew instinctively that Sophie would never see him again. David wasn't the kind of man who could stay with someone after discovering they'd manipulated him so completely. Now it was just Ryan and Sophie standing at the altar. With 150 confused and shocked wedding guests watching them, Ryan could hear whispered conversations starting up around the church. As people tried to process what they'd just witnessed, Sophie was looking at Ryan with desperate hope in her eyes. "Does this mean ... Can we try to work this out? Can we start over?" Ryan felt his heart break a little more, but not for himself this time. For her, Sophie still didn't understand the magnitude of what she'd done. She still thought there might be a way to fix this, to go back to the way things were before. "No, Sophie," he said gently, "we can't work this out. What you did wasn't just cheating. You created an entire fantasy world built on lies. You made David think I was abusive. You planned to keep lying to me for our entire marriage. That's not something we can just get past." Sophie's face crumpled completely. "So this is it? We're over?" "We've been over for months," Ryan said sadly. "I just didn't know it until today." Pastor Williams stepped forward, clearly feeling like he needed to take control of the situation somehow. "Perhaps we should ask everyone to give you both some privacy to sort this out," but Ryan shook his head. "No, I think everyone deserves to hear this. These people came here because they care about us. They deserve to know the truth." He turned to face the crowd and somehow found the strength to speak clearly and calmly. "I want to apologize to all of you for what happened here today. I know. This isn't what anyone expected when they came to our wedding. Sophie and I won't be getting married today or ever. But I want you to know that I don't regret telling the truth. All of you have been part of our lives, and you deserve better than to watch us make promises we couldn't keep." Ryan's mother stood up from her seat in the front row. She looked devastated, but there was pride in her eyes too. "We love you, Ryan," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And we're proud of you for having the courage to do what was right." That seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the church. Other people started standing up, some coming forward to hug Ryan, others going to comfort Sophie's family. The rigid structure of a wedding ceremony dissolved into something more like a family gathering. With people talking quietly and trying to figure out what to do next, Sophie's mother approached the altar with tears in her eyes. She looked at her daughter with a mixture of love and disappointment that was heartbreaking to watch. "Sophie, honey, what have you done?" she whispered, pulling her daughter into a hug. "I messed up everything, Mom," Sophie sobbed into her mother's shoulder. "I hurt everyone I love, and I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it," her mother said quietly. "But you can learn from it. You can become a better person because of it." Over the next hour, the church slowly emptied out. Some guests left immediately, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Others stayed to talk with family members and try to make sense of what had happened. The photographers packed up their equipment quietly and the musicians left without playing another note. Ryan found himself surrounded by friends and family who wanted to make sure he was okay. Tom had barely left his side, looking both proud of his friend and worried about him. "Are you really okay?" Tom asked quietly as they sat in one of the church pews. "I think I will be," Ryan said, and he was surprised to realize he meant it. "It hurts, obviously, but I feel like I can finally breathe again. I've been living in a lie for months without knowing it. Now at least I know the truth." As the church continued to empty, Ryan watched Sophie leave with her family. She looked back at him once from the doorway, and he could see the regret and sadness in her eyes. He nodded at her, a small gesture of acknowledgement, but he didn't wave or smile. That chapter of his life was closed now. 6 months later, Ryan was sitting in a small coffee shop downtown, setting up his laptop for a podcast recording. He'd started the podcast 3 months after the wedding disaster, calling it Healing from Betrayal. What had begun as his own way of processing what happened had turned into something much bigger. People from all over the world were writing to him, sharing their own stories of betrayal and asking for advice on how to move forward. The coffee shop owner, an older woman named Patricia, brought him his usual order. "Another podcast today?" she asked with a smile. "Yeah, this one's about forgiveness," Ryan said. "How you can forgive someone without taking them back into your life." "That's a hard lesson to learn," Patricia said. "Sounds like you're helping a lot of people figure it out." As Ryan started his recording, he thought about how much his life had changed. The wedding disaster had been the worst day of his life, but it had also been the beginning of something new. He'd learned that he was stronger than he thought, that he could survive betrayal and come out better on the other side. He'd heard through mutual friends that Sophie was in therapy, working on understanding why she'd felt the need to lie to everyone she claimed to love. He hoped she was learning to be honest with herself and others. He didn't wish her any harm, but he also knew he'd never trust her again. David had moved to another city and started fresh. Tom had run into him at a conference a few months ago and said he seemed to be doing well, though he was cautious about dating again. As for Ryan, he was taking things one day at a time. He'd learned not to rush into anything, to pay attention to red flags and to value honesty above everything else. His podcast was helping thousands of people, and that felt like something meaningful coming out of all the pain. The wedding that never happened had taught him that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be exactly what you needed. He just wished it hadn't taken such a painful lesson to learn it.